Dinosaurs were seen as man-eating monsters, but that's not how Hollywood has always treated them. They've also been seen as lovable, gentle giants. As pets. Even as man's protectors. But whatever role they play, they have held a fascination for audiences for over 80 years. As far back as 2,000 years ago, Chinese had discovered huge fossils which became known as dragon bones. It wasn't until the early part of the 19th century that scientists studying the growing number of bones being unearthed finally stated publicly that these were from animals long since dead. By the late 1800s, entire fossils discovered in Europe and America were put on exhibits like this one, and the public's curiosity with these giants would never disappear. At about the same time, another new science was capturing the public's imagination: motion pictures. Early movies consisted of little more than short skits, which were shot as quickly and cheaply as possible. The plots were as simple and down to earth as the audiences who paid a nickel to see them. Then in 1902, a Frenchman named Georges Méliès took one giant step for movie making when he put audiences on the moon. Almost single-handedly, Méliès pioneered trick photography, and suddenly, film fantasy was born. With this invention of fantasy, a pattern was set that exists today. The original material was enhanced by a combination of film technology and artistic imagination. The same thing happened with the first movie, Dinosaur. In 1909, a cartoonist named Winsor McCay bet his colleagues that he could bring a dinosaur to life. After studying the dinosaur skeletons at the National History Museum, he combined his skill as an artist with the recently discovered technology of animation. For no apparent reason, he named his dinosaur Gertie.
That was fairly accurately portrayed, surprisingly enough. Gertie was a kind of a dinosaur that was one of these long-necked sauropods, built like an elephant, and probably acts somewhat like an elephant.
Movies have always reflected the mentality of the times in which they're made. So reflecting those gentler, simpler days of 1909, the first movie, Dinosaur, was more like a big puppy than a cold-blooded reptile. Gertie meant photographing Winsor McCay's drawings one at a time. The same basic technique is still in use today, but in 1909, animation was totally unperfected. All told, McCay drew 10,000 individual cells for his 5-minute film. Even working long hours, it took several months to get all the necessary drawings done. Gertie the dinosaur may have taken Winsor McCay forever, but the public loved his dinosaur. And filmmakers realized that these beasts had a future in Hollywood. But there were two problems. They needed to make them look real and build them much quicker. Now, about the same time McCay was taking Gertie around the United States in his vaudeville act, another young filmmaker perfected a method called stop-motion photography that would make a dinosaur literally come to life. His name was Willis O'Brien, and he perfected the use of stop motion. Other movie makers had already used the technique, but it was O'Brien who set a milestone in the way movies looked at dinosaurs. Much like animation, this process was incredibly time-consuming. The clay figures were positioned, a single frame of film was exposed, the figures were moved slightly, another frame was exposed, and so on. At 18 frames a second, a scene like this could take a week or more to produce.
I think the really exciting thing about O'Brien was that his spirit generated from things from his own life and things that he had seen and knew and loved, you know, cowboys, horses, Indians, and sort of real-world ideas as opposed to ivory tower ideas or regurgitated ideas that a lot of the filmmakers are coming up with now. I mean, he was the first guy up with a lot of the ideas, and he had a wonderful sense of humor and a wonderful sense of adventure. And, you know, sometimes when I see his drawings or reproductions of his drawings from projects that didn't get made, I still get excited about them, you know.
The comedy style of the day was slapstick, with lots of wild physical gags. In retrospect, it seems that O'Brien was heavily influenced by the master of slapstick, Charlie Chaplin. O'Brien's sense of humor went beyond slapstick. He also enjoyed creating bizarre new characters to populate his film world. Here O'Brien offered a comical version of the missing link, the creature who supposedly proved the evolution of man from apes. But there's another kind of evolution to be seen here. The missing link shows that nearly 20 years before he ever developed King Kong, O'Brien was toying with the idea of apes and dinosaurs fighting from domination of the prehistoric world. But where Kong, made in the depths of the Depression, would be bloodthirsty and savage, the missing link was as simple-minded and clumsy as pre-World War I America was. America marched off to the First World War believing that it would be glorious and heroic. But for the doughboys in the trenches, modern 20th century warfare was terrifying and deadly. Soldiers often found themselves attacked and besieged by immense cannons, huge noisy monsters that dwarfed them in size and strength. In O'Brien's classic, The Ghost of Slumber Mountain, made just after the war, dinosaurs underwent a dramatic change in character. For the first time, dinosaurs were monsters. The gentle, clumsy buffoonery was replaced by uncontrolled violence. But post-war audiences loved it and made the film a huge hit.
Ghost of Slumber Mountain showcased the first realistic movie dinosaurs of all time. The films O'Brien made before that were basically comedies. They were like precursors to what we call today claymation. They were also, in some ways, early versions of the Flintstones type of situation, because they had little cavemen doing, involved in everyday activity with that sort of parallel with modern times. But those films were ludicrous compared to The Ghost of Slumber Mountain. So I think that was the real appeal in that film. It was the turning point. It was the first realistic dinosaur movie.
O'Brien realized the potential successes future films featuring his creatures could expect, and began working on what would become the most successful dinosaur epic of the 1920s. In the early 1920s, expeditions brought back the first nest of dinosaur eggs from the Gobi Desert. The Carnegie Museum's expeditions to Vernal, Utah found the largest collection of dinosaur bones in the United States in a region that is known today as Dinosaur National Monument. The public was fascinated, and each new discovery only served to excite them more. Hollywood was becoming more exciting too. Movies were grand, splashy affairs, full of thrills, action, and high-flying adventure. In response to the tempo of the 20s, the movies really started to move. Location shooting brought a new dimension of realism and a much greater sense of scale. But of particular interest was the resurgence of monster movies. In those so sophisticated times, the only thing we had to fear was the unknown. It was Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, creator of Sherlock Holmes, who provided the next important step in dinosaur films. His book, The Lost World, sparked a tremendous response among dinosaur fans all over the world.
Certainly the results have justified me. I'm quite sure I could fill a room of my house with the letters that I have received from people telling me of the consolation which my writings on this subject and my lectures on this subject have given to them.
In 1925, all the elements came together to create movie history. Willis O'Brien's version of Doyle's book was the first feature-length, big-budgeted Hollywood movie about dinosaurs, and the public loved it. The story told of the driven Professor Challenger, played by Wallace Beery, and his quest to explore a part of the Amazon where dinosaurs were still supposedly living. The story is familiar today because we've seen so many versions of it. But in 1925, this was big stuff. After fighting their way through the dense jungle, Challenger and his team finally reached the heart of the Amazon, where Lone Plateau has imprisoned an entire prehistoric world. The first glimpse of O'Brien's monsters shocked audiences every bit as much as it did Professor Challenger and his expedition. O'Brien's earlier pre-World War I concept of dinosaurs as big, clumsy, comedic house pets was long gone. Here in 1925, there were savage killers living in a completely uncivilized world. Gertie's good nature was replaced with some roaring 20s rage. Though they seem simple by today's standards, O'Brien's dinosaurs were considered a technical marvel in their day. By this point, O'Brien had perfected a method of making these dinosaurs not only move with greater realism, but actually look more real. Out went the clay that tended to melt under the lights, and in came, instead, metal armatures that were surrounded by stuffing and a cover of foam rubber. You might say that O'Brien's attention to detail was all-consuming. Everything ate everything else. But just how accurate were his dinosaurs?
Dinosaur movies are pretty much fantasy, and they portray dinosaurs not as the way they really were, but as monsters in the way they thought they looked at a different time. And there's also a lot of imagination, not based on any reality whatsoever, that go into those films. The way I feel about it is dinosaurs are real animals, and if you know the way they look by the bones, you should do them accurately. For instance, doing a Tyrannosaurus with 3 claws on its hand instead of 2, which it should have, is the same to me as doing an elephant with 2 trunks. I mean, it's a real animal, it looked a certain way. To change that, it's not the real animal anymore. Another myth that the movies perpetuate is that dinosaurs all lived at the same time and in the same place, when actually they lived all over the world, every continent, over a span of 140 million years or more, during which time they were constantly dying off and being replaced by other kinds of dinosaurs. So the classic confrontation, say, between a Tyrannosaurus and an Apatosaurus or a Stegosaurus never happened.
Seen anything of that nature before, and although Willis O'Brien didn't set about to deceive the public, there were many people, I think, in the hinterlands actually thought somehow or other he must have gone back in a time machine to millions of years ago, that they were seeing reality. And I believe there was some little effort on the part of the publicists to make the public believe they were really seeing creatures that had survived from millions of years ago.
I think one reason that dinosaur films or films based on prehistoric themes were very, very popular back then was not only because of these discoveries. There were a lot of discoveries made during that time, but also the Scopes trial was very much in the news at that time.
Clarence Darrow and William Jennings Bryan debated the theories of creation versus evolution. The public have been raised with the traditional biblical paintings of God and Adam and Eve, but they turned to the movies to see what prehistoric life would have been like.
A lot of these early films had missing link characters and caveman characters. In fact, the Lost World movie included in it a missing link character called the Missing Link, and that character is not in the book, so obviously that was made to capitalize on those trials.
Again, O'Brien was toying with a monkey character, this time a human in elaborate and very uncomfortable looking makeup. Kong was still 8 years away, but another aspect of his character came into place with the Lost World. He was a menace to society. For the second time in O'Brien's career, an ape-like missing link character died on screen. Perhaps more important than the film's accuracy is his sense of drama. An extremely important precedent was set in The Lost World when Professor Challenger's explorers actually brought a dinosaur back to civilization. Naturally, it got loose. The Lost World wreaked havoc in London, it also caused quite a stir in Hollywood. The box office returns were incredible, and Willis O'Brien's career was in high gear. But the picture business didn't drown itself in sequels as it does today. It would take 8 years and a major false start before O'Brien finished another film. But when he did, it turned out to be his masterpiece.
The introduction of the Vitaphone has been received both by the public and the artistic world with a great deal of interest and favor. All right, everybody quiet, please. After the bell.
Today, it's hard to understand what a radical invention talking pictures were.
All the time in the tropical time away.
Imagine a new process that completely changes the movie industry, requires buying all new equipment, and completely revolutionizes the way movies are made. That was what sound did. That it became popular at the same time the Depression started in America made Hollywood's job doubly hard. The studios struggled to find material that fit both the new technology of sound and the new mentality of the 30s. Box office returns dropped so drastically that several studios almost went out of business. That was the situation at RKO, where Willis O'Brien was working on his biggest picture, called appropriately Creation.
Creation was going to be a feature. It was going to be directed by Harry O. Hoyt, who directed The Lost World, for RKO. And the story was about a prehistoric promontory that rises off the coast of South America. It's interesting that both Creation and The Lost World were set in South America. Anyway, it had dinosaurs. It was going to be a feature-length movie with conflicts and battles and them trying to get off the island and this sort of thing.
Like Lost World, Creation used stop-motion photography to bring the dinosaurs to life. But O'Brien's genius was his ability to use special effects for greater dramatic effect. This time, when he put actor and dinosaur together, he had them interact.
Creation was to be a story all its own. It seemed to me in retrospect it was somewhat similar to the novel of Edgar Rice Burroughs of The Land That Time Forgot. And all that survives is just a bit of footage with a human actor running away from one of the dinosaurs. And it's rather unusual. I don't recall it being in any other of the dinosaur films that you seem to be on the back of this dinosaur and running after the man.
The film was too expensive for RKO, and production was halted. About the same time, producer Marion C. Cooper was brought to RKO, and he had a special idea for a movie. Cooper was developing an action film that would feature a giant ape. He originally intended on putting a man in the ape costume and build miniature sets that would make the ape seem huge. But when he saw the tests for Creation, Cooper realized that the stop-motion method was perfect for his film, soon to be known as King Kong. Like the Brontosaurus in Lost World, Kong was brought to civilization with truly disastrous results. But unlike the dinosaur, the character of Kong was given real emotions. O'Brien's attention to detail and his ability to use special effects in the most dramatic way earned him the respect of the Hollywood community. But in a way, the film represented a step backward in his career.
Here, Obie went from being a producer to being just an effects creator or supplier. But on the other hand, he went from being the producer of a screenplay that wasn't particularly good to being, a technician on a film that was largely successful and, remembered for decades and decades. So one wonders what would have happened if they'd made Creation instead of Kong. It's hard to say.
As far as the dinosaurs in King Kong being accurate, many of them were accurate by the way they looked, again, based on what was known at the time. Most of the animals, if not all the animals in King Kong, were based on the artwork of Charles R. Knight, whose paintings and sculptures were very well distributed and readily available. What's not accurate, all the dinosaurs in that film, all the prehistoric animals were too big, way too big. The Tyrannosaurus, for instance, had 3 claws again on each hand. That's because that's what they thought back then. All the animals, all the dinosaurs dragged their tails, which we know today they didn't. They carried all of them carried their tails off the ground, and the Tyrannosaurus, that beautiful scene where it turns its back to the camera and swishes the tail like a snake, that's an impossible movement, but it looks great. It's very dramatic on film. The plesiosaur that attacks, which everybody seems to think is a snake, but it's not. It's a plesiosaur, it flippers, that attacks Kong in his Skull Mountain domain there, is bending like a snake, which it never could have done. I mean, there would be a rib cage and everything in there, so it couldn't have bent like that. The Stegosaurus is showed with paired plates. They should be alternating plates. The Apatosaurus that chases the guy into the tree, it was a harmless herbivore that shouldn't have chased anybody in the tree, let alone eaten them, which he did in the film. But I don't like to point out the inaccuracies about King Kong because it's such a great dramatic movie. And again, a lot of it was based on what they knew at the time. And a lot of it, as far as the size is concerned, was based on apparently Marion C. Cooper always insisting, coming down to the miniature sets and always insisting, make it bigger, make it bigger, make it bigger. So that's why I think they're the size that they are.
By the mid-30s, dinosaurs were bigger than ever. You could find starlets riding a brontosaurus, or directors like C.B. DeMille confronting a Tyrannosaurus. Sinclair Oil Company, using a cartoon brontosaurus as their logo, put a lot of advertising dollars behind the campaign.
So the world was dinosaur conscious in the 30s. In fact, even at the 1933 World's Fair, there were all kinds of dinosaur exhibits. This is a life-size, or almost life-size, pteranodon, which is not a dinosaur, it's a pterodactyl, which was made for the 1933 Chicago World's Fair, the Century of Progress. It was part of an exhibit called The World a Million Years Ago. What that was a kind of a dome structure that you would go into, and there would be a moving sidewalk, and the sidewalk would convey you through time. They had all these different exhibits of mechanical prehistoric creatures from different time periods, and it was as if you were going to the past. This looks pretty clunky by today's standards, But in 1933, this was state of the art, and I guess if you didn't see it up close enough and the lighting was just right, it was pretty amazing and fooled a lot of people.
Dear Fido.
By the late 1930s, a light-hearted cartoon dinosaur, not unlike Gertie, appeared to make us laugh. With little basis in reality, this dinosaur was mostly a comic foil in a cartoon short.
Well, thanks. Now come on, I'm famished.
Almost exactly 30 years since Gertie had been created, we had come full circle in our portrayal of dinosaurs. The most radical change lay ahead, with a war and a bomb. The invention and use of the atomic bomb is one of the most important milestones in the history of man. With its incredible power to devastate, the bomb gave us an interesting perspective on dinosaurs. We could actually comprehend extinction. In Japan, the only country ever to suffer the horror of an atomic bomb, the damage to property was immense, but the impact on the public's psyche was incalculable. The experience of the bomb created the next major step in the movie's portrayal of dinosaurs. Movies have always been sensitive to changes in society and are quick to reflect them. The devastation of the atom bomb shattered our sense of security and made us realize how vulnerable we really are. The Cold War fostered a growing paranoia, and suddenly, the giants from the past became the symbols of the evil in the world.
It's all new. Ghidra, the three-headed monster, created from an atomic fireball hurled from outer space. Ghidra, the three-headed monster, battling Godzilla, Rodan, and Mothra for mastery of the world. Ghidra, the three-headed monster, in color.
Reptilicus, a monstrous beast, immune to bullets, spewing green death at all who oppose him. Reptilicus, indestructible Reptilicus, in color.
In the 50s, there was something that happened. Life magazine published a series called The World We Live In. And this included one issue which was about dinosaurs, and it was cover featured. This painting on this cover of this magazine was on every newsstand in the country. Everybody saw it, and it started a whole new interest. That magazine led to comic book series. It led to the first commercially sold dinosaur toys that were sold in places like dime stores and toy shops. And so I think that's what happened in the 50s. A spillover from the influence of the World War II ending with the bomb, and then people again becoming dinosaur conscious because of that Life magazine cover.
During the early 1950s, master special effects artist Ray Harryhausen brought us one of the first atomic dinosaurs in The Beast from 20,000 Fathoms. But the most famous of them all was Godzilla. He combined the destructive power of the A-bomb with the personality of the dragons of ancient folklore. In a string of successful films over many years, he destroyed Japan, but then had a sudden change of heart and began to protect its citizens.
Godzilla, was no longer animated. It was a man in a suit with models that he was kicking about and pummeling. And for a while there, the animation end of it was kind of on the decline, and it was much faster and less expensive to have men in suits. You know, when Ray Harryhausen got in the act and began animating, and Jim Danforth, that can take several years out of their life, because when you just have to make a little movement and take a shot and another little movement and take a shot and so on in order to see something on the screen, they can take a whole day for a very short sequence.
Filmmakers let their imaginations go wild, and with the eye on keeping their budgets down, often gave us the most unusual sort of prehistoric beast. We had lizards pretending to be dinosaurs, puppets, cartoon characters, and even punk dinosaurs. Everyone got into the act.
Dinosaur movies have not really been influenced that much by any scientific reality. Today, for the most part, dinosaur movies are still kind of a throwback to the 1930s. They're not really based on fossil evidence or scientific reality of any sort. They're based on earlier movies. So instead of going to a skeleton as your reference point and saying, let's reconstruct this animal from the skeleton up, they'll go to an old Willis O'Brien or Ray Harryhausen film and use that as their inspiration. Again, models that were sometimes based on restorations and things that were done around the turn of the century. So we still have a lot of inaccuracy in dinosaur movies, with the exception of The Lost World, placed within the context of when it was made and what was known back then. There has never yet been an accurate, a Hollywood-type dinosaur movie in which these animals were portrayed accurately based on what we know today.
We've seen how films have been inspired by the fossils that have been uncovered over the last century. But paleontology's mysteries have also inspired filmmakers' imaginations. The debate goes on. Why dinosaurs, which existed over 140 million years, would suddenly disappear some 65 million years ago? Were dinosaurs warm-blooded, and how did they sound? Some scientists have even wondered if they completely disappeared. For example, this plesiosaur, dead for some 100 million years, may, according to some people, have a relative living in Scotland. Nessie, as some people call the reported animal living in Loch Ness, has been reported for several centuries. Nobody is sure what it is, if it exists at all. But reports of a long neck peering out of the water have linked it to the long-dead Plesiosaurus. Thousands of miles away in the Congo, scientific expeditions have investigated native reports of a huge creature that closely resembles a brontosaurus.
This is a dream that, as more and more exploration continues, it's more and more difficult to hold that dream. And so far, the evidence isn't very conclusive. Chances are it's not a dinosaur. It may be some other reptile or maybe some mammal that might have some resemblance to some parts of a dinosaur. But the odds are that it isn't really a dinosaur.
While highly unlikely, Hollywood thought it interesting enough to make a film about the possibility of finding a living dinosaur, the Disney production Baby. It may be a sign of optimism, but one of the most recent films featuring these ancient giants stopped showing them off as killers and once again brought us a caring, fun-filled character, not unlike Gertie.
Long ago, when the Earth was new, 5 friends, lost and alone,
Mother! Where are you?
took an incredible journey
You want to go with me? Yeah!
through a land of wonder and a land of danger.
Shut up! I hope he doesn't eat any of you. Quick, this way!
From the creators of An American Tale comes a story of friendship,
Do not stop! We must stay together!
courage,
Oh, you can't quit now. What if the Great Valley is just over the top of these rocks?
and laughter.
Littlefoot, quickly, come here. A tree star. It is very special.
A tree star.
It is very special. And it'll help you grow strong. Where we are going, there are so many of these leaves.
Have you ever seen the Great Valley?
No.
Well, how do you know it's really there?
Some things you see with your eyes. Others you see with your heart.
Movies have come a long way since 1909, when Winsor McCay gave character to a skeleton and created Gertie. Scientists have learned a lot more about dinosaurs in those 80 years, but for the audiences, dinosaurs will fascinate and amaze us, thrill us, spark the imagination, and make us ask, what if?